And he has also done field works in the languages across the world, which include Nigeria, India, Bolivia, Paraguay, Papua New Guinea, and Chile, and many more places. And he is the founder, president, and the founder director of the Living Tongue Institute, and which is dedicated to the language documentation and language revitalization. And joining him is Dr. Luke Horo, who is our alumni. Dr. Horo is a fellow with the Living Tongue Institute and is a postdoctoral researcher for the South Asian region. He has worked among the speakers of Korku, Nihali, Sora, Mundari, Santhali, Sadari, Assamese, Rabha, and one more language. And he has earned his PhD from IIT Guwahati in 2018. And he is interested in the preservation and the documentation of lesser documented language of India. We have many more languages in India. So with this brief introduction, I invite the speakers to take the dais and probably begin their presentation.
Great. Thank you very much for that nice introduction. And thank you for the invitation to this important conference. And we hope that we learn as much as we can help share some information about the work that we've been doing over the last few years on documenting languages of India, specifically in the Tibeto-Burman and Munda language families. Before we start, we need to have a word of thanks for our funders. We have received generous funding from a number of sources, including the National Science Foundation and the National Endowment for the Humanities in the United States, and the Geographic Legacy Fund of National Geographic, as well as a grant from the Ziegler Family Foundation that have covered the various languages on this screen. So turning now to the outline of the talk, just going to briefly introduce our organization, Living Tongues Institute for Endangered Languages, talk a little bit about language endangerment and what I call the linguistic ecology of tribal languages in India, and then some specific issues in the documentation and classification of one particular language in Arunachal Pradesh called Koro Aka, specifically showing why different types of data are necessary in order to make a comprehensive analysis of the phylogenetic classification of languages, which often focuses only on lexicon. And we'll discuss a little bit why morphology is relevant to this as well. And then we're going to outline the program that we call the Munda Languages Initiative, which is one of the major programs of Living Tongues. And we'll specifically talk about types of data we collect and analyze and the types of output that have come from this project. And lastly, we'll finish with a little bit about a new tool that we've developed to assist language documentation on a more macro level, what we call the citizen science participation. So this is engaging public members who speak these languages to create these tools we call the living dictionaries. So first, now turning to a little bit of background on Living Tongues. We were founded 17 years ago. And we're a global network of scholars, citizen scientists, and language activists who are united in our passion to document languages and assist in efforts at language maintenance and revitalization and to promote public awareness about the global language extinction crisis. So we have, three different prongs, basically, kind of public engagement, language documentation, which is the scientific linguistic part, and then supporting communities in their efforts to maintain and revitalize their language. And the Munda Languages Initiative more or less does all of those simultaneously. So we'll use that as to exemplify this type of approach. So just now turning to the overall concept of language endangerment and what I will call the ecology of language endangerment. There's just two basic facts that we want to start with, which is something that I think most of us here know, but it's good to remind people that everyone speaks a dialect and most only perceive others as having accents. So we typically don't think of ourselves as having an accent, and we think it's only other people as speaking dialects. But everyone speaks a dialect of some variety, of some named or unnamed lect or language, and we all also have accents. So that's the sort of basic facts. Now, when we look at the global distribution of the demography of languages across the world, what we see is that there's a very pronounced skewing, such that more than half of the world's languages are spoken by a total of only 0.1% of the world's languages, while conversely, roughly 80% of the world's population speak one of 85 of the largest languages in the world. So there's a very, very major skewing between major and minor languages. And this is reflected, among other things, in the trends in language endangerment that we see cross-linguistically across the world. So in terms of what I call the ecology of language endangerment, this means the sort of environmental circumstances which languages find themselves and why they're endangered. There's basically two major patterns that we see culturally, cross-globally. One of them is, of course, more famous than the other, and this is the consequence of so-called settlement colonies, where language endangerment on average is quite severe. And up until fairly recently, the repression of those minority languages was an overt process. So this involved any number of horrific acts perpetrated amongst indigenous populations by the conquering colonial powers in the Americas, in Australia, in Siberia, in Sudan, and Taiwan. So it's important to note that this is not a European phenomenon, and it's not a New World phenomenon per se. But each one of those places that I've mentioned have all been subjected to this type of situation, and that means that a large number of languages are in rather bad shape, or many have even gone extinct at this point in those areas. But then if we look across the world, what we see typically in Asia and Africa, aside from Siberia, Sudan, and Taiwan, as I just mentioned, is a different type of ecology of endangerment. And this is what you can call the neo-nationalist, internal neo-colonialist practice. And this basically is what defines the context of India. So there are an unequal distribution of power and resource access and monetary access and other things which are enfranchised in various ways in these countries where there's a dominant or majority or plurality language that often is promoted by the nation state as a unifying force, and so possibly grounded in an idealized understanding of what a nation should entail. But often this manifests itself in language hierarchies which are very hostile to the maintenance of the minority language communities that are at the bottom of these hierarchies. And I'll give an example of this in a second. So the reason languages basically are shifting is because this ecology is hostile to their maintenance. So the covert pressures, sometimes overt, but often more covert pressures, are all favoring the politically, economically, and socially dominant languages. And the minority communities who are disenfranchised this way are thus, in essence, forced to shift to languages higher up on that hierarchy to avoid the taint of being speakers of these more devalued languages. And India stands out as an extremely linguistically hierarchically structured polity, possibly the most structured, with the most layers attested in certain areas. And this varies, of course, from state to state in India. So in India, it's more of a state-based process rather than a national process, but there are some national tendencies as well. But the good news is that it's not too late for these languages, and things can be done, intervention can be taken now, and the reversal of that language shift is still a plausible scenario, unlike many other parts of the world in the settlement colonies where we can make these efforts, but it's going to be a very, very difficult struggle for these languages to restore functionality, given the rate of erosion that they've reached now. So just to give you a little bit of examples of where and how endangered languages are, we'll look at a couple of maps here. So first we'll look at what I call the global language hotspots. These are distributed across different continents. There's hotspots in all continents, but the ecologies are different and the level of endangerment is different. So if we then switch to a map of endangerment of these languages, what we see is, so in this map, green is less endangered and red is more endangered. So, and those interceding colors, yellow, orange, etc., are sort of a cline of endangerment. We see that there is a strong concentration of the ones that are red, that is the most severely endangered languages in these former settlement colonies. But we still find, endangered languages clustered in these other parts of the world, but these are more intact languages and often threatened or just starting to show endangerment, as opposed to like moribund or have only a handful of very elderly speakers. Now, of course, in these areas, we find such languages. There's some severely or endangered or moribund languages everywhere, but nevertheless, there's a global cline that can be seen. Now, if we turn specifically to India, what we find is, as I mentioned before, this very pronounced language hierarchy, which can be demonstrated through any number of linguistic practices and socioeconomic values attached to different languages, et cetera, their function in media, their function in mass communication, et cetera, from the very small micro level up to Indian English. So we can have a sort of transnational and national and state level languages, and then we have what are often local Indo-Aryan lingua francas, at least in the northern part of India, obviously not in southern India. And then within the so-called tribal languages, there's actually a couple of gradations. So we have scheduled tribal languages, Bodo or Santali, for example. Then we have so-called literate tribal languages, and then we have the very lowest rung, which is the variably called illiterate, primitive, and backwards, or recently rebranded a few years ago, particularly vulnerable tribal groups, like the Bihar in this graph that we see here. Okay, so I hope no one here would ask this, but members of the public frequently ask, why would we care? Well, every language has the same value to its community of speakers as an emblem of ethnic identity and as a storehouse of community history that they have a moral right to keep. And endangered languages also offer data that push and challenge theoretical advancements. And given that many language families are likely to vanish in the coming decades, endangered languages must stand as the highest priority for directing documentation efforts, funding initiatives, and research in linguistics in this century. And there are also economic and biophysical or medical reasons for maintaining and promoting additive bilingualism or additive multilingualism and not subtractive monolingualism, or in the case of India, perhaps subtractive bilingualism. So going from, say, multiple languages to only two. Why now? Well, the 21st century offers new challenges and new opportunities. Languages and traditional knowledge are vanishing at an unprecedented rate, and this will only increase unless action is taken. Unfortunately, elders are passing on an enormous storehouses of information gathered over countless generations about plants, animals, sustainable landscape, maintenance practices, et cetera, are being lost. So we need to secure this information so it's not lost to future generations who could do who knows what with it. So, but if it's not documented, then it won't exist. And a language that passes out of existence undocumented basically never existed. So that is the reality that workers on endangered languages face. So now I'm going to talk about one specific endangered language and how it's fit into a sort of typology of linguistic research, and specifically going to mention about a language in Arunachal Pradesh, which is called Horo. So first, just let's mention a little bit about Arunachal Pradesh. It's an extremely linguistically diverse state. Almost all of the languages belong to the Trans-Himalayan or Tibeto-Burman phylum. Tibeto-Burman has recently been rebranded by specialists Trans-Himalayan, so I'm getting used to using that term now. There are some Thaic languages from the Thai-Kadai family spoken in Arunachal, but for the most part, the languages belong to the Trans-Himalayan phylum. However, there's many, many different subfamilies on the order of Romance or Germanic within Indo-European as subgroups of Trans-Himalayan within Arunachal Pradesh. So it's a very linguistically rich and diverse area. The Horo language itself is spoken by somewhere between 800 and 1,200 speakers in East Kameng district, spilling over a little bit into West Kameng, but mainly in East Kameng. The language is endangered. Very few children speak the language, mostly speaking the local Arunachali Hindi. Now, some of the larger languages of Arunachal Pradesh, based on the census of 2011, as listed in the table here. Nishi is the largest of the languages, and certainly the most culturally dominant of the languages. The Adi cluster, which is arguably multiple languages, and Mishmi certainly is multiple languages, as is Monpa. So some of these terms are macro terms that are more cultural based. Tangsa is another one that's many, many different languages likely. So the linguistic diversity of Arunachal Pradesh is actually much greater than this map from Grewal would suggest. So even this is fairly diverse. You know, there's a couple of dozen languages listed in here, but within that, there are several sub-languages that are considered dialects locally, but under objective linguistic criteria are separate languages insofar as they aren't mutually intelligible with the other dialect that they are supposedly a dialect of that language. And I'm going to talk about one such case specifically in a second here, the Koroaka. So just to give you an idea of where we're talking here, so this is the sort of west central part of Arunachal Pradesh, where China, Bhutan, and India all come together in that area, and we'll be mainly focusing on the two languages represented by the red dot, and really the one in the center there, Koro. However, there's a lot of other work that we've done in Arunachal Pradesh. So this is Dr. Bikram Jora, another researcher at Living Tongues, and I, in 2016, working with some of the Sartang speakers in West Kameng. And the Koroaka language in particular is in a fairly remote area. In addition to there being special permits needed to travel to Arunachal Pradesh, the terrain is very difficult, and that makes it much more difficult in a lot of ways to reach these speakers of languages. In fact, this is a shot taken in 2008 as we were going on this raft to this village called Kichang, which is now abandoned. But there were a couple of dozen speakers of Koroaka at the time in 2008. So specifically, the languages of Arunachal Pradesh garnered some attention a few years ago from scholars who, specifically Roger Blench and Mark Post, who published a paper making claims that there were multiple language isolates or microphylas in West and East Kameng region of Arunachal Pradesh. But the data that they used was almost exclusively lexical, and the comparisons are largely impressionistic. And despite being couched in a cautious approach to phylogenetics and language history, this proposal is anything but cautious and careful comparative linguistics, as I'll show you in a second. So one of the big problems is that some of the major information sources like the Glottolog have adopted some of these unsupported claims, despite the fact that they remain undemonstrated and are not supportable by data. So specifically, I'm worried about the classification of Koroaka, which has been claimed to belong to a microphylum that included one other language called Milang, which you saw on the map. But I'm going to show you why that claim is nonsensical. Now, the Koroaka are an interesting case because they're a group of people who self-invisibilized within the larger Aka tribal group. That is, they consider themselves a dialect of Aka and a subgroup of the Aka. And by Aka, I mean the Hruso Aka people. And one of the common things you'll hear said in that area is that we're exactly the same, just a little bit different in dialect. And indeed, culturally, they are very, very similar. They have many of the same cultural practices, but their language is in no sense just a little bit different, as we'll see on this next slide. So the lexicon in particular are quite divergent from each other, but the word order, interestingly, is often the same. So in Hruso Aka, Hebo Gyudze means these three black pigs, so literally this pig, black three. And in Koroaka, that's Tilele Makala. And this is also this pig black 3. So we see the linear order of the syntax, the word order is identical, but basically there's no cognacy between any of those 4 words. Now you can understand why someone who was just looking at this might be thinking, oh, well, these languages couldn't possibly be related on any level ever. But Hruso-Aka is a Tibeto-Burman language. Koro-Aka is also, and I'll show in a second why we should believe that. So in addition to the Hruso-Aka, there's another language called Sajalan or Miji, which was both claimed to be isolate languages by Blench and Post. But both of these languages are very clearly related to Bangru, which is spoken more in central Arunachal. And this is the so-called Hrusish group that was demonstrated to belong to Trans-Himalayan very clearly by Bot and Liebherr in a paper that was published in 2015. And I refer you to that to see the Hrusish arguments, because it's quite strong. But what was proposed by Blench and Post is that Koro-Aka and Milang were neither Tani or Trans-Himalayan, and most of the languages that surround Milang are Tani languages, and once you go east from Koro-Aka, you get into the Nishi territory and then into the Tani languages. And so they proposed this putative Siangic family, based on Siang district in Arunachal, which was based on really just a handful of correspondences between those 2 languages, Koro and Milang. And it basically comes down to a very small number of words, 1 grammatical marker, nga, the negator, which is postposed, and then these words for field and no. That's pretty weak evidence for a language family, but part of the issue is that the Tani languages are quite closely related to each other. And so they're very easy to show what's a Tani language. And they're, my impression is that they're about as similar to each other as Turkic languages. So one, you can learn the other ones fairly rapidly. But there's one Turkic language which is quite divergent from the rest of the Turkic languages, and it's called Chuvash. And this is a language which some people for a while disputed was Turkic, but has, a more careful consideration of all the grammatical and lexical data shows that it's clearly Turkic. And so too, if we consider grammatical data, when we look at Koro-Aka, we'll see that both Milang and Koro-Aka appear to be sisters to to Proto-Tani, that is the proto-language underlying Tani. So the original language spoken some hundreds or thousands of years ago. In fact, that the Milang language and Koro-Aka can be evidence for linking this taxon within Tibeto-Burman, that is Tani, with Digarish, which is Idu-Mishmi and Digaru or Taron-Mishmi. So there's this macro family called Macro-Tani, which consists of Proto-Tani and all of its modern languages, plus these 2 languages, Milang and Koro-Aka. So basically the same argument can be made for Koro-Aka. But if they had considered grammatical data, specifically morphological data, they probably never would have come up with this conclusion. They had the negative, but if they considered the whole system, like a single grammatical element can be borrowed from one language to the other. Entire paradigms of case marking and tense aspect marking is not borrowed, especially when there's very little lexical borrowing. So that's a context scenario which simply doesn't exist. And in fact, once we see all of these grammatical correspondences, and if we look larger picture and see other Tibeto-Burman languages, we'll see that it's nonsensical to exclude Koro-Aka from Macro-Tani. So specifically, if we look at the even the details of individual Tani languages, you can find parallels to some of the lexical items that were proposed as Siangic, this putative new phylum of languages, like the word for what in Nishi Higi, which was proposed as a Siangic word. So it's not a Proto-Tani reconstruction, but nevertheless exists in Nishi. And Nishi is not in contact with either Milang or Koro-Aka, and also is in such a relationship with the languages that surround it that it would never borrow a word for what from such a low status language ever. That just doesn't make any sense. So the negative marker nga also has parallels in other Tibeto-Burman languages. So, you know, it's, again, there's when you actually examine the data, that proposal simply falls apart. It evaporates. There's nothing there. One of the common arguments that they made was that, well, we don't find these words in Arunachali languages in Proto-Tibeto-Burman. But the fact is that none of the data from the Arunachali languages went into the reconstruction of Proto-Tibeto-Burman. And some of these roots are quite common and spread across different groups. So like for the example, the Koro-Aka word for chicken, chole, is clearly at least the first syllable cognate with the Taron Mishmi word chua. So chu and cho are trivially relatable as roots. But the fact that Arunachali roots aren't used in the reconstruction of Proto-Tibeto-Burman can't be used as evidence that the roots that occur in Arunachali languages aren't Tibeto-Burman. That's a completely circular argumentation. If they didn't go into the reconstructions in the first place, of course they aren't there. That's a nonsensical argument. But the really strong evidence is the morphological evidence. And here is where really any proposal other than the fact that these languages belong to Proto-Tani or to Macro-Tani and are sisters to Proto-Tani makes no sense. So for example, the genitive, locative, and accusative case markers are all clearly cognate with Proto-Tani. So similarly, the finite verb morphology is almost entirely cognate between Koro-Aka and Proto-Tani. So we have the desiderative future irrealis marker lung, the completive and gu, and then this progressive or imperfective, which could be related to either dung or dong. We haven't worked out the historical phonology enough to know whether it correlates to the sit, stay, exist form or the lie down, exist form. So various types of copulas from stative verbs. Moreover, there's a whole series of what they call predicate derivations in Tani languages, which typically number in the low hundreds. Another term for these are so-called verbal extensions. Likely these arose from nuclear serialized constructions historically. But Koro-Aka has 100 or more such things, and Milang has them well. And it's hasn't been fully worked out, the verb extensions, what the reconstructions are, but it's actually pretty easy to find cognates between Koro-Aka and any one randomly selected Tani language. So if we look at the next slide here, verb extensions, and taking the Adi variety Galo, so Galo Adi or Adi Galo, we see a whole array of very clearly cognate verbal derivational markers. So verbal derivational markers are not very commonly borrowed, and also bear in mind that Koro-Aka is not in contact with Galo. So there's really no other explanation for this other than that they derive from the same protoforms, and that is a so-called macro-Tani protoform. And each individual language took its path towards developing these in their own way, but they very clearly form a set that a paradigmatic set, and paradigmatic sets of elements, inflectional or derivational elements, are simply not borrowed this commonly across languages, and they're only borrowed if you have intense contact between the languages, and these languages are not adjacent to each other, they're not in contact. So to summarize what we've found out about Koro-Aka, it's not a member of this putative microphylum called Siangic, and Siangic is not an appropriate name even if it did exist, because Koro-Aka is not spoken in Siang, so that's just valorizing one language, Milang, over another, and that's not the way language family names are created. It has a number of lexical items which are supposedly uniquely Siangic languages outside of Macro-Tani as well. So they're Trans-Himalayan languages, Trans-Himalayan words or Tibeto-Burman words, but they just are not reflected in other macro-Tani languages. Really, when we see this situation, what we see is that when Tani languages don't agree with Koro, Aka, and Milang, it means that Tani, that is Proto-Tani, was innovative, not vice versa. So this is, in fact, doing historical linguistics backwards. As I mentioned before, the case system of Koro, Aka is very, very much cognate with Proto-Tani, as are the system of extensions or predicate derivations. And some of these, when we look at it, are very normal patterns of grammaticalization. So going from a serial verb to an auxiliary verb to a verbal extension, like the Proto-Trans-Himalayan give, be, going to an encodative, or the Koro-Aka form give, turning into a benefactive applicative. So these are two of the most common developmental paths that you'll find for a verb meaning give. Historically, they grammaticalize into encodatives or to benefactive applicative forms. So what the real situation seems to be is that Koro-Aka is a macro-Tani language. That is, it's not a Tani language, but it's a macro-Tani, the next branch up from Tani, and likely forms a link to this other group, the Mishmi, Digarish Mishmi. And Koro-Aka is the westernmost version of this family. So Luke's now going to talk about our major language initiative in Central and Eastern India, in mainland India, if you will, and that is the Munda Languages Initiative. So thank you, Luke.
Luke, we cannot hear you.
Okay, I hope.
Yeah, audible now.
Thank you. So just to continue from where Greg just summarized the findings of Koro-Aka language classification, I would like to emphasize on this fact that language classification is an important achievement in describing languages that are lesser described or have low resources, and often often inappropriate language classification leads to assumptions that are not favorable for doing a good linguistic description of a language. And I'll talk through this in the following slides, as well as we have been documenting and describing the Munda languages of India. So Munda languages of India are listed in the census of India, and there are roughly 8 or 9 languages that are being recorded in the census of India. And Munda languages, as most of us must be knowing, are the languages belonging to the Austroasiatic language phylum, and they're spoken in Eastern and Central India, and they have a population of each of the languages have varied populations, where Santali or Mundari may have the most number of speakers, whereas languages such as Koda and Bhumij may have very few speakers. However, it should be noted that the census data mainly reflects how people self-report their identity and ethnic affiliation, and this does not actually reflect the linguistic knowledge of the people. So there may be often mismatches between what the census figures show us and what the actual realities of the number of speakers of the language can be. And as for example, when we were documenting the Sora language in a diasporic population in Assam, it was revealed that the number of Sora speakers is much more than it has been recorded in the census of India. So this is something that needs a careful evaluation as well. So as I mentioned already, that Munda languages are spoken in Central and Eastern India. Greg in 2015 mapped the Munda languages and their geographical locations. And if you can notice here, there are 2 major clusters of Munda languages based on their geographical distribution, one being the northern cluster, the other being the southern cluster. However, these geographical distinctions do not necessarily reveal their genetic classifications, as as Greg again showed in his genetic classification of Munda languages, where it can be seen that while the languages clustered together in the northern part may be having more similarities with each other, but the languages that are clustered together in the southern part do not have much similarities, and there may be even sub-branches of the southern clustered languages. As we can see here, some of the languages in the southern cluster, such as Sora, Jurai, Gorum, Juang, Kharia, Remo, Kutub, all of which are mostly spoken in Orissa and some bordering areas between Orissa and Jharkhand even, whereas the northern languages such as Santali, Mundari, Korku, Mahali, Bhumij, Kol, Ho, Asuri are all spoken in the state of Jharkhand mostly, and then some neighboring states of West Bengal. And only recently, we have been also able to document some of the diasporic Munda languages that are spoken in Assam, which were transplanted to Assam after the speakers migrated as endangered tea laborers some 100 years ago, and then have settled here permanently as of now. So we are also considering some of the diasporic Munda languages that are spoken outside of the heartland of Munda languages in India. So about the project that we are working on, it's been started somewhere in 2010, and it's been almost 2.5 decades where we have started working on systematically documenting and describing the Munda languages, and to comprehensively document the language and some of the cultural practices as well of the Munda languages speakers. And the goal is to promote and sustain these languages so that we can build a centralized online repository of linguistic and cultural information on the communities speaking these languages. We also aim to initiate an integration of local community members into various stages of the project as they find appropriate to join the project and they're comfortable to join in the project, so that we can facilitate the learning of transferable technical skills and instill the pride in the language and culture of those speakers, and so that they can find new functional domains for linguistic expression. So here is our team, starting from top left, Dr. Bikram Jora, Anna Luisa, Greg, myself, Diego, Aman, Ria, Anukaran, Shashi, Sakshi, and Ria's name was appearing twice. So this is our team living in different parts of the world. And some of our consultants in the Munda language project. We have the Ho language consultants here, Paulo and Rinki. And we have a Sora community member who requested to withhold her name from public domains. We have Bhumij language consultants in Jharkhand. And Gata and Gutub language consultants in Orissa. Our Remo and Gata language collaborators in Orissa again. And one of our Sora language, who started as a consultant but is now an experienced language analyst as well as a language documentation in charge. He has a Opino Gomango. He has an advanced degree in linguistics, and he has helped significantly in compiling various dictionaries that we have been working on, and he has also co-authored various publications that we have produced over the last few years. So talking about the Munda Language Initiatives specifically, we have certain kind of data that we want to collect and analyze, and this has been a continuous process, and there have been good amount of data that we have collected so far and also have analyzed, and some of this data have revealed new insights into the languages that were earlier either not documented or even inconsistently described. So our data ranges from the smallest unit of the language being the phonetic data to the largest unit of language data being the discourse and pragmatic data. So anything that ranges between the phonetics until the pragmatics, such as phonological, phonotactic, morphological, morphotactic, morphosyntactic, syntactic, semantic. So we try to acquire data in all these different domains. However, these are not just the only domains, but since these are the domains of analysis of the language, these are one of our prior data domains that we have been collecting for the various Munda languages that we have been documenting and analyzing. And it should be mentioned here that although these are individual domains of different linguistic structures, they are all interconnected. And when we look at the interconnections, we get the holistic picture about how the languages are structured and how the languages have evolved over the years, and what kind of information we can get from the synchronic description about the diachronic development of these languages. Also, we focus on language data that includes prosody and intonation, as we know that prosody and intonation can have a significant meaning about the language structure. We acquire data that shows the prosodic patterns and the intonational patterns in the language that we document and analyze. And so in general, like when we look into the type of data and the formats of data that we have data that are audio recordings, and we have data that are video recordings, and we have data also that are written texts by people who are literate in a second language or a language of wider communication, who are able to use the second or third language orthography to write their own languages. So this is also a significant and important data that we try to collect. And written versions of languages with like no established orthographies are particularly interesting because they give insights into how the speakers perceive sounds, and also give information about their psycholinguistic realities of what an word actually is, how speakers define words, and how speakers define word boundaries in their language using a second language orthography. So this kind of information is also extractable from the written text that we collect from various languages. And this is important as well in establishing this is important, as it is well established in linguistics that there are often differences between how one defines word boundaries, because there are two well-known types of words in linguistic descriptions, including phonological word and grammatical word, where various languages show that the phonological word and grammatical words are not do not map into each other, and a grammatical word may not be a phonological word, and vice versa. So when we take written texts from people and analyze how people use a second language orthography to define those boundaries, it gives us insights into what is the perceivable word in the languages of the speakers according to their own intuitions and their own perceptions. And also written texts give us insights about how people judge the appropriateness of a writing, or what the correctness of writing can actually be. And that is also a very important knowledge that people carry about language correctness and language appropriateness based on their own perception of the language. So these are the things that we normally collect, and then the formats of the language that we normally have. So from here, I would request Greg to again exemplify some of the data that we have collected so far and some of the analysis that we have done. And after that, I'll again continue with some particular analysis that I have been doing in the Munda languages. Over to you, Greg.
Great, thanks, Luke. So just following up on that last point about so-called P words versus so-called G words, we can take this particular Santali utterance. In principle, we should be able to play this sound file. Can we see if we can play it? It may or may not work. So it worked when I tested it, but I don't know. I could play it here.
I think the computer sign need to be included, or maybe some at your end somewhere you have to also share the computer sign.
Okay, well, anyway, the spectrogram, perhaps, let's go to the next slide, may show that what appears to be 4 prosodic words, or each with their own peak, but 1 grammatical word in this long negative verb form that means I did not wash him or her. The orthography that was established for Santali writes the negator and the subject marker as 1 word, and then the other 3 parts as 1 word. So they've made this decision to separate one of the prosodic words out from the other 3, but still write the other 3 prosodic words as 1 grammatical word. So this is the type of mismatch that we were talking about that exists between the way grammatical words are structured and the way that prosodic words are structured. Diving a little deeper into the data, onto the next slide, we mentioned the concept of morphotactics. So morphotactics is the nature of the level of integration that a particular word forming element has within the larger word structure. So, for example, what at first glance appears to be a prefix on a possessed noun, as in unsalon on, the woman's son, upon further data acquired, it turns out that this has the distribution of a phrasal marker, that is, it occurs on the left edge of the noun phrase here on the adjective, modifying the word child in Marie's young daughter, Marine Pedangari, that one. So here the phonoprosodic data may suggest that this is a prefix, but the syntactic and morphotactic data suggests that it should be considered a clitic. So again, we're having mismatches between how to analyze particular elements, in this case, the possessive prefix. Furthering the interconnectedness of different types of data, syntax, semantics, and discourse are all very clearly interconnected. So on the surface, we have multiple different ways of arranging the 3 words, the subject, the goal, and the verb in this motion verb phrase, Rabi is going to the village. The default structure is seen in the first example, where it has subject and then the adjunct or goal and then the verb. And this is just as a neutral interpretation, Rabi is going to the village. Now, if we flip the verb and the word go and the word village, this actually, somewhat interestingly, focuses on the subject. So this means it's Rabi who is going to the village, not somebody else. Even more curiously, if we reverse those 2 words and get the order of verb subject and then the goal, it actually gives the extra meaning that this is sort of hedged a little bit. He's planning on going to the village, but it's not certain that he will. So this is an example of how complex the interconnectedness and the nuanced meanings that syntax, semantics, and discourse can have. And it's just something that one needs to be aware of as one collects and analyzes data. So another example, and Umarani last night gave us, or yesterday morning, excuse me, last night for me, gave the information about using photos or images to help get more data. And this is a process that we call photo elicitation. It's very easy to go around a village or the surrounding area of where a community lives and snap photos of everything, and then you can get them to tell you if they're there with you, or you can load it up into a slideshow and present it to them, and then you can identify and verify the forms with various speakers. And typically this will get you much more than just the word for these things, but all kinds of little short text about their use, value, significance, etc. Or it can prompt such discussions. And we'll give some examples of output that we've created using that photo elicitation process with regards to Bihar and Gata in a couple minutes. We can also film someone engaging in a task, or we can have someone narrating something, what they're doing. You can also just have an instructional video where someone's telling you. You can have sort of a static interview type film, or you can have a more active instructional. This is, I'm doing this now. I pour this in here, and then we cook this or whatever. You can also film unnarrated activities, what is often called B-roll in film terms, and then have someone else view it later and describe what that person's doing. And some of the videos of this type you will find, you can find in our archival deposit of various languages, for example, at Paradisec, and which we'll give some URLs for later. And then also on our Living Tongues YouTube channel, which I've given there. So I'll demo now, we'll just see, these are stills, because we didn't want to have technical issues, from these different types of film elicitation and film narratives that we've used. So first, this is a screenshot from Srinivas Gamango telling a story about the Mandua spirit. This is a more static interview. He's sitting there and for about 2 minutes was discussing this particular festival. On this next video, this was narrated by Srinivas Gamango, but and filmed by Apino Gamango, and this was a they're walking around and they're looking at this house that houses a particular deity called the Lurnisum, and then describing the ritual practices surrounding the Lurnisum. So you get a lot of rich cultural data with this and a lot of rich linguistic data in it as well. You can also have more active demonstration videos. So we have 2 screenshots here from a video that's on our YouTube channel where Srinivas Gamango again is at a much earlier phase. You can see he looks a lot younger in this than in the first screenshot. He is demonstrating some of the traditional instruments that the Sora used, and we have another shot from that same film, and I would encourage you to watch the film. It's very nice and gives you a nice little snippet of Sora traditional musical instruments. We also can do unnarrated video. So this was just a roughly 2-minute video of this man Mukund going up to Mukund Kirsani is his name, going up to, who's a Gutub speaker, going up to the palm wine tree and showing how he gathers the palm wine for the morning palm wine gathering. So these are just examples of the types of data that we use through video elicitation. Now, other types of elicitation techniques, the most familiar type, of course, would be just direct elicitation of the how do you say blank type. This, of course, works best for basic vocabulary and simple sentences. It also can be used for phonetic and discourse studies, for example, recording words in isolation or in various focal or out of focus frames to get the impacts of both focal intonation and non-focal intonation, so we can distinguish potentially utterance level versus various other prosodic features, since we know that utterance and focal intonations can disrupt what is otherwise the prosodic patternings of the language, or enhance them in some way, manipulate them. Data can also be sort of random, spontaneous, perchance recordings like conversations. Of course, you have to ask if you can record, all of this. This is all understanding. This is grounded in normal ethics, et cetera, et cetera. You also can sort of curate a spontaneous conversation. So you can ask a directed question, what are the steps taken following the death of someone in the community? Or how do you make baskets? Okay, so all of these data types that we've talked about yield different insights than others do. So they all basically have to be pursued for a comprehensive documentation of a language. Now, probably the single most important genre for getting a good understanding of the language are texts, but they're also probably the most difficult thing to work with. But it is really where the language manifests its genius and showing the true nature of the language, its flexibility. Now, texts come in a lot of different flavors or genres, so conversations are very different from narrated monologues. Children's speech is very different from that of adults. Language games or jocular uses of language like tongue twisters, riddles, jokes reveal much about the phonology and semantics of languages and their cultures. Songs as well, but songs are notoriously difficult to transcribe. But they also should be included, of course. And it's very important that different segments of society be recorded, because often we have gendered or age-graded variation in a community. And of course, as is well known, we have locational differences. Different villages may have different varieties, et cetera. So all the different sociolinguistic groups have to be included. One of the standard ways in modern linguistics to represent texts and textual analysis that includes phonemic and interlinear morphosyntactic information as well as translations is through the use of this program called Elan. It's kind of cumbersome to use, but it is a very effective tool. And we have lots of Elan texts in our archival deposit. And Luke's now gonna talk a little bit about another very important type of data that he, as a researcher in phonetics, has been working on.
Luke, please unmute.
So as I was mentioning earlier, that we get interesting insights about languages from proper and systematic documentation and description. Here I would like to exemplify one such evidence of describing the phonetic properties of a language called Sora. And it was revealed that Sora has a iambic stress pattern, whereas in disyllables, always the second syllable is more prominent than the first syllable. A further analysis of the data revealed that this stress pattern has also an influence on the vowel quality in the language, and it was found that the vowel quality is more accurately or more properly realized in the prominent syllable only, whereas in the non-prominent syllable, the vowel qualities change, and even different vowel categories tend to merge with each other. So this is one interesting finding that we found out, and this showed that in previous descriptions of the language, such kind of analysis was not done. As a result, the entire vowel inventory was proposed as a larger vowel inventory with 9 vowels, which through this analysis was revealed that is not true, and rather the language has only 6 distinctive vowels, and that vowel qualities change mainly because of the syllable positions where the vowels are occurring. So we also have been analyzing other Munda languages, such as the Santali language. We analyzed the same issue of the stress pattern realization, and in Santali data as well, we have found out that the stress pattern is iambic, where various cues of stress, such as vowel duration, vowel intensity, and fundamental frequency, all are realized on the second, all are higher in the second syllable in comparison to the first syllable. And as we expanded our analysis to different contexts of utterances, such as isolation, phrasal, and even in unaccented contexts of utterances, we see that the same pattern is observed for all cues, except for the F0 cue, where we see that the isolation context was not showing the regular pattern, and we proposed that this could be an utterance level phenomena that needs further analysis in the Santali language. So these are the insights that we normally get from the analysis of the data that we collect from the field from various Munda languages. And we, as an output from these findings, we have presented various publications in the traditional academic output journals, and here are a few of the articles that we have presented recently. And this publications deal with various aspects of the language structure, including phonetics, morphology, and syntax. In addition to our traditional academic outputs, we have also been able to create archival deposits for 3 Munda languages so far, Gata, Gutub, and Sora, and they are accessible freely for community use, as well as for researchers who would want to further analyze these languages or do cross-linguistic comparison of these languages. This data are freely accessible in the Paradisec archival deposits. And these all these data are annotated for phonetic, morphosyntactic, as well as in English translations. So the entire annotation has been done very systematically before they were being archived into these archival deposits. Here is how the archival deposit looks like at Paradisec, and you can access this archive and have a look into the data that we have deposited here. Besides creating online resources, we also create resources for the communities to use and to advance their knowledge system and for the other scientific community as well, such as we have produced an ethnobotanic book from the Bihar tribe, where they basically where it basically shows the medicinal values of various flora and fauna that are found in the ecology of the Bihar community, and how they have maintained that knowledge to live in different circumstances, I mean different diseases and sicknesses, how they have used this knowledge to accommodate, to advance, to help themselves to overcome those sicknesses and diseases. And also we have created some children's textbook that describes the words and basically the words of the language in 2 different languages, in Hindi as well as in the Bihar language, so that they have a kind of transition from their mother tongue to the dominant language that is spoken in their surrounding. Likewise, for documenting the language, we have also created a trilingual Bihar Hindi-English dictionary, where we have given the meanings of Bihar words in 2 different languages, Hindi and English, that we hope will be a useful thing for the community to learn other languages, as well as for researchers to use this data corpus to analyze or further study this language. And we also propose to produce a video documentation of the Sora language, where we are preparing a community narrated video where the community members will themselves narrate what their community is about and what the significances of their cultural practices and what their historical origins are about. And this is still in a process of production, and we hope that this will be a very useful output of our documentation project for documenting the Sora language. And some of the initial recordings can, of course, be viewed in our YouTube channel. So from this point, we also want to talk about one of the tools that we have been developing for documenting the Munda languages, as well as the languages globally, that we hope will be able to bring a larger language corpus very rapidly, and will also involve community members to contribute to the science of documenting various languages. And I request Greg to talk about our Living Dictionary project.
Great, thank you, Luke. So yes, the Living Dictionaries project is one of our new exciting projects that we've been promoting through Living Tongues. And we'll say that this is sort of scholarship meets citizen science in corpus creation. And so first, turning to the background, we asked ourselves, with all this wonderful technology we have these days, wouldn't it be awesome if technology could help disrupt these language biases that have caused minority languages to feel they have no place in the modern world, and that they've been shifting to other languages as a result. And you know, with 3,000 or more languages in danger of being lost before the end of this century, we know there is a need to act quickly. We decided that what we really needed to do was develop free tech tools that could serve citizen linguists and communities of speakers and the scholars that work with them equally. The main idea behind this is that there's just too few resources, financial and human, to cover all of the issues that all of the different languages around the world are facing. And financial issues are a major thing, so that even when there's the will, there's often not the means to have access to these resources or develop these resources. So what is a living dictionary? Well, a living dictionary is a multimedia repository that has minimally text represented in some orthography linked to a sound file. So the minimal level is a entry with a text entry and a sound file. That's the ideal. Not every entry in every dictionary has sound files yet, but that's the ideal. And you can click on this word or phrase and hear how it's pronounced by a native speaker. Photos and audio are integrated. I'll talk in a second about some new features that are developing. And you can also represent text in multiple scripts. It's a mobile-friendly web platform, so people can develop and use only their phone to do this, so you don't need access to a computer. They're valuable tools for language documentation and language revitalization and maintenance. So the process is someone sets up a dictionary and can invite other people to contribute, as many people as they would like. You might ask, why a living dictionary? Well, we feel it's a moral imperative of the 21st century to decolonize and democratize linguistic resources. Living dictionaries, unlike print dictionaries, are never out of print. They're free to use for all. They're infinitely expandable. They're quite fun to make and use. They allow communities to cross the digital divide, which is a very important symbolic gesture, and really underscores the value of languages that feel threatened or are at risk as having a modern function. And they serve community needs and scholarly needs equally. And they also encourage community participation. So now we're just going to show a couple of examples of parts of different features of ones that already exist. So turning now to first what we call the gallery view, and this is the Gata language spoken in southern Orissa. And this is so the gallery view returns only entries that have photos attached with them. And so you can see immediately this is not your average dictionary, because here we have just photos if that's what you're looking for example, to develop a lesson plan on the knowledge of plants. So this is searching under the semantic domain of plants, trees, and other vegetation, and tagged for the gallery view, which means it has only the entries that have photos. So this is one of the features that we have. So a couple more examples of gallery view of different semantic domains in Gata. We have the plants on the first slide. Then we have birds. So we have the bird semantic domain. We have 144 terms for birds with photos in this language. We have more bird terms, but 144 with photos. Also, we have 130 terms for reptiles and amphibians that have photos in our Gata Living Dictionary, which is a fairly large one. It has almost 6,400 entries. Each dictionary has its own URL, and each entry has its own URL. And so when we go down to an entry level view, so this is the entry for each individual entry, here now looking at the Sora language, another Munda language, we see that this is a very multilingual and multi-scriptal dictionary, and also shows some of the features that this includes. So we have the lemma, the head word, We have it represented in both Assamese script as well as the Sompeng Marir script, which is the indigenous script used by a portion of the Sora community, as well as the orthographic IPA based, and then the actual IPAs under phonetic. And then we have translations of this into Oriya, Assamese, English, and Hindi. And then we have the part of speech, various semantic domains, its morphological breakdown here, because Konsodenji consists of 3 morphemes, the word for dog, a very complicated noun suffix un, which is hard to describe the function of in an hour, much less a minute, and then the plural marker. And this particular form we recorded in West Bengal, and the so-called West Bengal Sabar. So it also identifies the dialect. I didn't have enough space to identify the speakers in the screenshot, so I just skipped that. Now, if we turn to the next slide, we see another feature of the Living Dictionary, which is it's not just available in English. So this is what we call the table view. So we saw the gallery view, and we've seen an entry view, and this is the table view using Bangla as the interface language. So this searched for birds in Apatani, which is a language of Arunachal Pradesh. And there isn't necessarily a great reason to have it in Bangla. This is just for demonstration purposes that you can do this if you wanted to have your interface in Bangla. For other languages spoken in West Bengal or Bangladesh, Bangla interface is going to be quite useful and valuable. Turning now to the next slide, which is a list view, back to the list view. So this gives a list of words. Here we have Gutob under the semantic domain search for food, cooking, and foodways. And here we have the Assamese language interface. So this is another language interface that we have made available for the Living Dictionaries. Turning now to the next slide, this is Sora, again in the list view. And here we've searched under the semantic domain animals. So we're turning up ones that have photos and ones that don't. Now, if for some reason you were in East Africa and you really wanted to work on the Sora language, we turn to the next slide, you can see that the Living Dictionary interface is also available in Kiswahili. So we have about a dozen languages that it's available for right now, and we have more in the works. And I'll talk about that in just a second. So the future plans for the Living Dictionaries is, so the background is that all the money, we have never had funding for this project. So all the money for it has come from donations to Living Tongues Institute. And we use that money to pay the coders that do the really difficult coding work related to this. We have a video feature now that's functional, but it's being beta tested by a few dictionary teams. So it's not a cross-platform functional yet, but it will be. So we're working out the bugs in a couple of dictionaries before we turn it loose on everything. We have an export feature. It's currently only does it in CSV, but it will be soon expanded to create PDFs, for example. That's been a big request. We are also working on developing an offline mode so that you can work offline, and then once you actually get a signal or something with your phone, it'll push up the data that you've used. So we hold free monthly webinars about how to create and expand these dictionaries. You have to register to take part. The next one is the 24th of March. They are free. Now, these interface languages have all been done by a network of scholars who volunteered to do this work. So we have Hindi and Oriya in the works right now, but we would most certainly welcome volunteers for translating the interface into other major regionally dominant scheduled languages of India, like Tamil, Telugu, Kannada, Malayalam, Manipuri, Nepali, or any other that is a target of shift among minority language communities. So in summary, this is really all about language justice. Colonization and nationalist development schemes have caused thousands of language communities to become disenfranchised. And most countries are not actually investing resources needed to support minority languages, even if on-paper policies pay lip service to this. So we've aimed to obviate institutionalized barriers to prevent equal status and equitable treatment of all forms of linguistic communication, and that includes sign languages. The video function is key to having sign language living dictionaries as well. So we're very excited that this is now functional. And in summary, we would like to say that with respect to the living dictionaries, we feel optimistic that citizen science can help bridge the gap in the lack of resources for under-resourced languages, as long as powerful tools that are grounded in linguistic best practice are made freely available to everyone in as many different languages as possible. And with that, we say to you, Sintaben, that is Sora for thank you all. And if people want the references, we can supply them later. But thank you very much for listening. And it's been a wonderful experience for us. So we welcome any questions you might have.
So thank you very much, Greg and Luke, for the excellent presentation. I think I'm quite much impressed by the depth and the field survey that you have carried out, and the points that you have raised about some endangered language in India and the effort that you have undertaken for preserving them is commendable. I don't have very much background in the linguists, so probably I can easily appreciate. I would have few questions as an outsider for this particular field. We do all aware about there are a lot of languages being found and already detected. There are thousands of languages are there. So in my humble understanding, I understand that these languages have developed because of the isolation of self-sustained living of certain populations, which probably is going away because of the globalization, and our demands are basically looking for iPhones. Certainly iPhones will not be produced in every locality. So of course they will have to interact with others. And is it not this very reason which is making many languages endangered? Apart from that, there are small populations, but that existed historically. This is my humble understanding. Can you comment on this?
Sure. Yes, that's an excellent question. Thank you very much for it. That the question is grounded in an assumption that there is a competition between languages that can result in only one coming out on top, and this is the ideology I was mentioning at the beginning of what we call subtractive monolingualism or subtractive bilingualism. So the idea is that we need to add languages to people's repertoires, not replace one with another. Okay, so it is. There's yes, you are correct that in things like using of iPhones or doing banking or many other types of things, there is the linguistic market has dictated that certain languages have that role. But that doesn't mean that you have to speak that language when you're eating dinner with your family at home. But that's the thing is that people internalize these negative valuations of their language and their identity because they don't have those roles. So they think, well, we just should speak this language and not other languages. So really it's a kind of a zero-sum game mentality that we're trying to combat here. And this is partly why we want to have, so for example, you mentioned the iPhone. If you have an iPhone, if you have a living dictionary, you most certainly can find your language online.
Yeah, I can understand that.
Yeah, right. So, right, exactly. So this is, exactly the type of situation that we're hoping to do. So basically, we're trying to promote through subversive use of technology to give each language community equal access to the resources that they deserve.
Correct. So I really appreciate that probably the technology or maybe our mindset has contributed to endangerment of a lot of languages. But again, these same tools can be basically used to at least address this challenge in some manner. Of course, your living dictionary happens to be one such very commendable initiative. And I hope we all can contribute to this thing, because you will look for volunteers. And I can see some of the messages being dropped by the audience that probably they will be happy to contribute to you in certain languages. So with this, I will basically request all other attendees to basically ask questions if you have for these two speakers. So audience, please, if you have anything to ask too.
So I'm Deepak from IIIT Dharwad. It was a wonderful presentation, Greg, and also Luke. There's an extensive work that has gone in. A couple of things. So in Munda language, so you said like there are certain resources created. Is it valid like to build any statistical models like say speech recognition or text-to-speech synthesizer? The resources good enough, or do you expect like more resource to be added to that? Like, yeah, can you comment on this? Yeah.
I'll take that one, Luke.
I'm not very sure whether I can give a very precise response to that. But as we have been analyzing and documenting these languages, it's been apparent that many of the languages primarily need a synchronic description of what the language structures are exactly about. And there are no synchronic descriptions of these languages as of now. So yeah, it is hard to say like whether building up a technology or building up some models for automatic speech recognizer for these languages is going to be appropriate at this point or not. I'm not really sure, but my concern is that these languages are like requiring more analysis and more proper description and more systematic description at first. But I think, yeah, I think there can be like dialogues about how the two things can go hand in hand and how one thing can contribute the other. I think that's something we can definitely discuss and talk out. Yeah, more thoughts on that, Greg?
Ideally, yes, exactly. Yeah, ideally, yes, that it will feed into those projects. You are correct in surmising that the level of data, as we heard in some of the presentations yesterday, has not yet. We haven't reached the level of the expansiveness of the corpus that we need for that. But ultimately, we feel like we will get there. The more community members we engage and get trained up, the more they can contribute to this and massively expand out this data set so that can feed those things in the future. But as Luke's saying, our primary focus right now is just getting a really good grounding in the description of these languages so that we can provide all of the sort of comprehensive information that's necessary to do all of the different types of output that might be needed for these communities to maintain their languages into the future, including ultimately the sort of holy grail, if you will, of ASR. So
So what necessarily I mean is both need not be sequential. Both can be parallelized. They can go hand in hand. I mean,
This is Priyanku. Can I add a few words here?
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Yeah, with the chair's permission. Like in 2018, Luke, you'd remember that we did a small ASR experiment with your data, the data that you collected for your dissertation, right?
Yes, sir.
So to a certain extent, a limited vocabulary ASR kind of thing probably can be taken up as a challenge, right? However, probably what the question that Deepak would like to ask is probably what is the kind of data, what is the amount of data that you have available in your database at this point of time? So that is something probably would satisfy Deepak's query.
Yeah. We have quite a few hours of recording, and we have recordings or data collected from various geographical locations, including Orissa and Assam. And yeah, as we mentioned, different domains of data. We also have covered most of the major domains of at least one of the languages. Like the Sora language, we can be very confident that we have covered a majority of the domains for describing the language, and those data have been properly recorded. So at least for one language, which is Sora, we feel like we have enough data to give a like pilot test for developing some ASR kind of model.
We probably have about 20,000 lexemes or lexical items, and but that or more. I don't know. I haven't counted. So maybe it's up to 25,000 by now or something. We have many hours of annotated video. We will have a similar, the Gutob corpus is also fairly extensive, as is the Gata corpus. In the next couple of years, we'll have Mundari and Santali corpora. That will be a fairly comprehensive set as well. So yeah, in the future, I'm optimistic that we'll be able to do a lot more of this. A lot, it's time-consuming work, of course. So it takes a lot of time to get this stuff done and out. So it's tedious, and you grind through it day after day. So that's the only way to get it done.
Yeah, I completely appreciate the kind of effort that goes in to collect the data in such difficult environments. I totally understand that. The advantage of some statistical models nowadays is that we can build models without any label called as unsupervised training models. On top, if we have some amount of data in specific languages, the technologies are there. I mean, so, but we don't know, I mean, as far as how linguistically it is pure in that sense, but at least technically it's doable. It's in a stage of that. So possibly that is one direction to look at.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Thanks.
So any other questions from
the
audience?
Sir, I see one question in the chat box, which is a very general question, maybe about languages in Northeast India.
Yeah, please read that question if it is.
Okay, so I'll read it. Yeah, I can read it. It says, why does Northeast India have more linguistic language diversity than the rest of India? Is there any scientific reason? And does language diversity have evolutionary advantages? Those are two pretty complicated questions. I would say that Arunachal Pradesh is probably reflects an earlier state of affairs and a more typical state of affairs where you have fairly small language communities, the terrain, of course, is difficult in that area, so it does lend to isolating different areas and stuff. But I think globally, smaller language communities, and there being many of them, was the norm. And it's in the relatively recent past, say, 4,000 or 5,000 years that you have these large languages accruing as different, typically associated with advancements in agriculture, and then expanding lands, and then drawing in other original different language communities into this area. The second part of the question, is an evolutionary advantage. I actually said I don't know how to answer that question, so I will defer to someone that knows something about evolutionary advantages of language. I know that language is a type of social capital, and therefore its multilingualism in particular is likely to be grounded in social networks and understanding of social networks, and that might have some more advanced and more different numbers, having a larger number of different social networks that you're a part of might have an evolutionary advantage. So I can imagine that, but like I said, I'll defer to someone that knows more about that topic than I do.
Okay. So any other observations or questions, audience, please? So looks like people have nothing to.
Wow.
Yeah.
Someone raised a hand.
Yeah. Please.
Am I audible?
Yeah. Now you are audible. Please go ahead.
Sorry. Hello. Yeah. Am I audible?
Yeah. Please go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. I heard. I mean, I was traveling, so I did not listen to it carefully. It's about the living dictionary. So would you elaborately explain how is it different from the other dictionaries, this living dictionary?
Well, there are multimedia dictionaries that are extremely flexible and easy to use. So a lot of other dictionary software or things that exist are extremely arcane and difficult to use and complicated, require complicated training. We could teach you how to build one of these in 10 minutes and you'd be off and running.
So this living dictionary, is it the e-dictionary?
Yes, it's online, but you can of course download either the entire dictionary or subparts of it for your purposes, whether it's pedagogical or whatever.
Okay, thank you.
Come to the workshop on the 24th of March and you can learn how to build one. You'll see how easy it is.
Great. Yeah, that's a good opportunity. Yeah. So any other question from audience, please feel free.
Yeah, hello all. This is Ashwini from Tipperary, Dharwad. It was a great session. Thank you, Greg and Luke. I just want to know what was the challenge, what were the challenges or difficulties you faced while collecting data, and how difficult it was to communicate with the tribal people?
Okay, maybe I can respond to that. So, so first of all, I think I can identify myself as one of the member of the Munda community. So that adds a certain advantage. But however, I do not speak any of the Munda languages, and it takes some effort to build relationship with people. However, we have been working with community members from various time, and we have helped them with various trainings to promote and preserve their own languages. And through those kind of activities where we work with the communities for their like priorities as well as for our work, we build this kind of relationship to have a good working terms with the community members. It of course is difficult. It takes time to build the trust. It takes time, and we also want to keep things ethical, where communities are aware of what the work that we are doing, and they have voluntary support for our work. So we try to make sure that they are completely aware about the work that they are getting involved in. So I think it's a matter of how we build the trust as well as how we work for the community's needs as well. That helps us to do our work in the field.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, we do have the advantage that several members of the research team are ethnically belong to either the Munda or Sora community, so that has helped with those. And in the other communities, our network of contacts of having worked in the area for, in my case, 32 years is, not trivial, and that has helped a lot too. So.
Hello, Greg and Luke. I'm from NIT Arunachal Pradesh. So I see you have done this thing, Apatani and what? Aka. You've covered. Which all languages of Arunachal Pradesh have you covered? And secondly, for this thing, analysis of vowels and all, how should our data set look? I mean, how should our data set be? I mean, should it be
I'll ask the first
Go?
part. You can answer the second part. The first part's easy to, so yeah, we worked with both of the Aka communities, several other smaller groups in West Kameng, like the Hugun and East Kameng, and a little bit further central. Yeah, Apatani, Puroik, Sartang, the Bangru, and Nishi, of course. But yeah, so mainly in sort of Western and Central Arunachal. So sort of in the first, so Arunachal sort of horseshoe shaped, I guess, and so that sort of top left part, or the northern part, I guess, and the northern western part of and sort of into the sort of west central area, so the language in that area basically. So not in the sort of central or southern parts or eastern parts at all yet. So that's the first part, but yeah, Luke will have insights onto your second question.
Yeah, for the types of data, as we were mentioning during our presentation, we try to cover every structural unit of the language, starting from the sound system until the larger structural unit, which is the discourse and pragmatics. So, so the type of data that we put into those different structural analysis is like lexicons, texts, and narratives in various forms, like either monologues or narratives of processes, or any other kind of conversation that can be a narrative as well. So for various analysis, we use various data types. So if we take, for example, the phonetic analysis we were doing on the vowel system of the language, we were first looking for contrastive sets for making sure that we have all the contrastive vowels in the language. And following that, we added the list with more examples that have those vowels and have similar or similar contexts where the vowels were occurring. And we also were trying to record speakers of various ages and speakers of various geographical locations and speakers of both genders. So trying to incorporate as much of linguistic as well as metalinguistic information into the data so that we get a very proper information about the language that we are analyzing. Yeah, so that's about the kind of data that we work on. I hope I could answer your question.
Yes, yes, but then it changes with every kilometers, right? How do you incorporate? Because many of the tribal languages do not have structured form.
Yeah.
And sometimes they don't have even the written form also. So how do you tackle that?
Yeah, so we treat data as they come from the field, and we also do not consider data as similar data unless we have evidence for it. Unless we don't have evidence, we treat data as they come from. Like even if we, and one interesting example I can give here is the Sora language. It not only has geographical variations, it also has idiolectal variation. Like a person can say the same word with two different vowels in a sequence of utterance. Like even within the same sequence of utterance, the speaker can say the same word with different vowels in the first utterance and the second utterance. So we still consider those as as valid data, and we do the analysis and show what the actual data shows from those data points. So we just treat data as they come, and then after doing the analysis and after doing enough cross comparisons, we come to our conclusions, what is a more meaningful conclusion for the data.
Right. When you have hyper variation like that, there's no easy solution. I feel for you. It will be difficult, but yeah, as Luke was saying, you don't even have to go 1 kilometer. You don't even have to go 1 meter if it's in the same person's head, having variation. So yeah, it's just a matter of collecting enough data and seeing what the sort of norms and that's where statistical analysis helps figure out what's going on. Basically, it's complicated. So I do feel for you. You have a challenge. What language are you working on?
We're currently working on Nishi and Adi.
Okay, nice, excellent.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, Nishi has a lot of variation, as does Adi.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think there's one query and somebody is asking about the latest techniques.
Yeah.
Platforms. Okay. Can you suggest some latest techniques, platforms for analyzing non-peripheral vowels in Arunachal languages. Yeah, I'm assuming you are familiar with doing phonetic analysis in Pratt and using various parameters that Pratt allows us to analyze vowel sounds. So this will again require like more elaborate discussion here. So just to make it short, I would recommend using some of the, apart from Pratt, yeah, apart from Pratt, as of my knowledge, I do not have at this point of time. But yeah, but that is something I think anyone who is familiar can add at this point of time.
Well, it's a pretty powerful tool, though.
Yeah.
Maybe you haven't
Pratt is
explored it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, apart from Pratt, I'm not familiar with any other platforms where we can do that kind of an analysis. So I'm mainly working on Pratt as well.
Good luck, though. Best of luck. It's an important task you're all involved in. So, I know. Just encourage you to keep at it.
So is there any other query, or we can close the session? Audience, if you have any query, please come forward. So with this, probably we come to the end of the session, and I especially thank Gregory and Luke for their excellent presentation and sharing their in-depth result. And I have my best wishes for their conservative activities which they have initiated, and hopefully we'll be able to connect to them to contribute to that. With that, I once again thank all the participants and especially the speakers for making this session a successful. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you and good day to all of you.
Priyanka sir, can we start with the next session now?
Priyanka,
11:15 we are supposed to start one.